This is Signal and Noise, bringing clarity to the chaos of modern marketing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Signal and Noise. We have a really exciting episode called Ad Fraud, or the Bad Guys Winning, where Rio and I talk with Dr. Augustine Fou. And for those of you who don't know who Dr. Fou is, he's pretty well spoken about in the ad tech and martech world, but he's an oft-quoted, occasionally controversial, and always deeply informative digital marketing executive and ad fraud investigator. And he's been on the front lines of digital marketing for nearly 3 decades. So we had a very interesting conversation with him. He comes to us from his own firm called Fou Analytics. He was the group chief digital officer of Omnicom's healthcare consultancy group, which was about a $100 million group with 8 agencies serving mainly the pharma industry and healthcare clients. He was also at McKinsey, was the SVP of digital strategy at McCann, MRM Worldwide, and he taught digital strategy and integrated marketing at Rutgers, my home state of New Jersey, and NYU's School of Continuing and Professional Studies. So yeah, we're really excited to have him on. As an ad fraud investigator, he's done a ton of work with the government, regulatory bodies. He's been a consultant to clients, helping them to mitigate cybersecurity risks, ad fraud risks, to really improve the effectiveness of their marketing campaigns. So I found the conversation deeply interesting. I know Rio did as well. Sometimes controversial, but it's topics that I think we need to breach to really understand how we make the digital media ecosystem as effective and efficient and safe, brand safe as possible. And I think he uncovers a lot of the challenges that we still continue as an industry to see in those areas. So Rio, you had a couple of quick news items to cover. Obviously, Cannes is coming up, and I know you're going to the south of France shortly. Plus, introduce the theme of the show and some of the key takeaways that we had.
Yeah, you got it, Brett. So I completely concur. Great conversation. Lots of meaty discussion about ad fraud, about some of his conclusions that, as you mentioned, I know some of it is controversial. We were joking in the episode that we're maybe expecting to get some hate mail. And so we'll see. Hopefully not. But yeah, to your point, everyone's getting ready for Cannes. I think because of that kind of a slower news cycle the past couple of weeks. I leave tomorrow night. Family goes to Turkey and Greece for a couple of weeks, and I actually fly straight to Nice and right off to Cannes. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great. Already a pretty packed agenda. Lots of really good stuff going on. So it's going to be fun. But I guess before we dive in, the one announcement I did hear, Brett, that I thought deserved some attention was actually by Meta. And you remember a couple of weeks ago, Zuck's been saying a lot of interesting things about just give people a button they can push, tell us what outcomes you want, we'll do it for you. Taking AI, applying it to the entire value chain in advertising, right? Everything from ad ops to trafficking to optimization, right? To audience development, planning, everything, right? So that's kind of his vision. He's not been shy about saying that. So I thought it was interesting how he really announced that they plan to fully automate ad creation and targeting using AI by the end of 2026. So very aggressive timeline, right? Some of these things are just starting to roll out, right? So what this really means when you cut down to it is advertisers, in theory, should be able to just input a product image and budget and then let AI rip, and it'll create the entire end-to-end campaign, including text, images, videos, audience selection, targeting, everything, right? So kind of wild. That'd be across Facebook and Instagram. So, and I guess WhatsApp too. So pretty incredible. That's an aggressive timeline. We talked about some of the agency layoffs last time. There's got to be some kind of crossover there, right? As a lot of these jobs are automated, does it challenge or break the FTE model? What do some of these look like in the end? It's interesting discussions, and, Meta, continues to make investments and make some pretty bold statements, in this area. Yeah. So I'm excited to watch that.
Yeah, for sure. And it certainly follows nicely after our conversation with Ben Wild at Georgian on AI and its implications for both the workforce, but automation and what's realistic with today's sort of data management ecosystem, tech ecosystem, and what that's going to look like in the coming years. So to see Zuckerberg come out with, and you and I have talked about that a couple of times on the pod, about creative being one of those first strike areas where you can automate and version and personalize with exponentially at a high volume without the need for a small army of people to do it. It'll be interesting to see the quality that comes out of this, right? And there's obviously going to there's some curation involved, and management and control, and obviously the planning and strategy that goes into these AI systems that develop out ad creative has to be sound. So you're not eliminating all positions, but you might in a sense be up leveling the core function that is managing this process, and all the stuff that's more commodity work, right? Is the stuff that AI is going to be doing and automating.
I guess
right?
my advice to young people would be get familiar with these tools, learn them. You want to be the person using them, not the person who's, I guess, being victimized or made redundant by them. That would be my advice.
Yeah, totally.
And I guess getting back to the episode, as you mentioned, important topic. It's not a new topic. I mean, we've been talking about digital ad fraud, right, Brett, for as long as there's been digital advertising, right? So we're going back 25 years. We thought this would be a great topic because there's been some interesting reporting recently including that, I thought it was kind of explosive piece in Wall Street Journal, right, where they claimed up to 40% of web traffic is quote unquote fake users, which is a high number, certainly the higher end of what I've been seeing. And actually, Dr. Fou has some even higher estimates, which may be higher than most people are comfortable. And you could argue that maybe he's looking at specific use cases, not generally, but it's a great discussion. But
some of his estimates always make me think. Yeah, he's got a 99% number that he throws out. Yeah, so we lean in because as we talked to him, we realized that's not really what he was claiming. He was trying to make a kind of overarching point.
Yeah, I mean, he did kind of say it, but he does have data to back it up. But I mean, the counter argument or kind of factual to that is, okay, was he maybe looking at? I mean, I think it's actually Adam Heimlich from Chalice was saying like some of Fou's studies are looking at bot honey traps and maybe not representative of the general internet, but that said, he has the data to back it up. Really smart guy, incredible CV. So I think everyone's going to really enjoy it.
So he's overweighting the bot traffic is what that perspective seems to mention.
I mean, in theory, it depends on what you're sampling, right? If you're sampling bot honey traps, sure. But I mean, but he's been saying this for a long time, and I think you look at over the years, a lot of the stuff he has been saying has been proven out, right? The number of, the amount of IVT or NHT. I mean, it's a lot of it, right? And it has an impact, and money's being siphoned off. So I think we just have a really good, productive discussion about what's behind it, what does it look like, what can we do to solve it. So I'm sure everyone will enjoy it. Let us know in your comments what you think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a lot of conversation about incentives and across the ecosystem, from the brands to the agencies that are doing the media planning and sometimes buying, to the DSPs and ad tech middlemen that are taking a tax for every ad impression served and every ad served. But yeah, fascinating conversation. Definitely tune in.
Enjoy.
Dr. Fou, a pleasure to have you on Signal and Noise. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Rio. Glad to be here with you.
And as we customarily do on Signal and Noise, for those that have been listening out there, Rio is going to walk us through a little bit of what we're going to be talking about with Dr. Fou today. Some very interesting ad fraud topics, and we've got a little thesis prepared to kind of set the stage for the conversation going forward, and then we'll go into a little bit of Dr. Fou's background and where he comes from, and then we'll get into it. So Rio, why don't you take us away?
Thanks, Brett. Dr. Fou, excited to have you on this. This has been a long time coming. I think it's going to be a really fun discussion. So just a preface here, and the reason why we called this episode Are the Bad Guys Winning? Look, I've spent better part of 2 decades working in digital media, untangling. It's almost like a Rube Goldberg machine, right? That really is modern advertising and ad tech.
I remember those cartoons.
Yeah, those are wild. No one would have really built the system the way it is. It just kind of happened to be created this way, right? With all the different components and players. And today we're really going to be looking at a problem that quietly siphons off quite literally billions of dollars a year and erodes trust every single day. And this is digital ad fraud. This is not a theoretical question, nor a hyperbolic one. For many brands, it actually does feel, and I've seen this doing media buys. It definitely sometimes feels like the bad guys are winning. You have bot farms masquerading as premium publishers. You have MFA sites boosting metrics, and you have got what are supposedly safe channels, right, like CTV, suddenly showing cracks. And, let's face it, there's a lot of pervasive illicit activity there. I think the problem is no one really agrees on exactly how much fraud is out there. Everyone does agree there's a lot. I've seen some estimates recently in the billions of dollars. I think Wall Street Journal published an article a few weeks ago, and they said it was 40% of web traffic is made up of fake users, which is just wild to think about. But for anyone who's been working in this industry a long time, not too crazy, right? So the stakes are high, and this is a very important topic. And that's why we invited Dr. Augustine Fou, one of the industry's most relentless fraud hunters, to help us cut through the noise. So the next hour, we're going to confront the uncomfortable truths, take a look at the latest tactics, and I think most importantly, we're going to attempt to outline some concrete steps that you can take before your next media plan goes live. So let's roll up our sleeves and see who's really winning, the bad guys or not.
Well, Dr. Fou, again, pleasure to have you. I know of you as a pretty well-known digital marketer, marketing executive, an ad fraud investigator, the CEO of Fou Analytics, which you honestly have the best tagline ever. See Fou yourself with better analytics. I'm like, great play on the name. I mean, with my last name, I certainly have heard that more times than I can count with the last name of House. But I saw you received a PhD at MIT. For those of the folks that don't know Dr. Fou, the age of 23. Can't tell you what I was doing at 23, but certainly not that.
Not getting a PhD.
You're a chief marketing science officer at the Advertising Research Foundation, a group CDO at Omnicom, among a bunch of other pretty high-profile roles. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
I think the way I would, look back at my career, it's really, I would call it science-driven marketing, right? So when I first started out, my company is called Marketing Science Consulting Group, and the idea behind it was, how do we use data and analytics to actually see what's working in marketing? Right, marketing and advertising, there's a lot of creativity, which is great. We all know the TV show Mad Men, where the creatives were the gods in the agencies, and that's all great. But as a scientist, I want to see, how do I reproducibly do marketing well, and how do I actually gauge its effectiveness? So it's really, think of it as a scientific approach to advertising and marketing. And I kind of fell into it because my PhD at MIT was in chemical engineering, material science. And you might have seen some of the Sony TVs or LG TVs. They have OLED, right? Organic LED materials, right? So that's the material that I was working on in the lab 30, 35, 40 years ago. And it's finally made its way into consumer products. So it has nothing to do with what I'm doing today. But it's more the scientific method. It's running the experiments and seeing if I can prove things out using my own data, my own experiments. So it's really kind of translated into the digital marketing space, and that happens to be a perfect fit because digital is really the intersection between marketing and advertising, which is very creative and fungible and not concrete, and data, where we can actually measure a whole bunch of stuff.
The art and the science.
Yeah, so I kind of fell into it. I left McKinsey in 95, early 96, and fell into what is now known as Silicon Alley, which is New York's version of Silicon Valley. And a lot of it was driven by advertising because all the big advertising agencies were here. Right? So New York has always been more advertising focused. Silicon Valley has been more tech focused. But in Silicon Alley, we started the mid 90s just building websites for people, and back then we still had to convince clients they needed a website because this was so new to them, they didn't really want it.
Oh, you're just reminding me of Rio and I kind of started there as well in about 1999.
Yeah, we're trying to sell websites. Trying to sell websites to like tile dealers at one point.
Yeah.
The home improvement industry.
Yeah.
And some agencies, that was the first wave of the internet, right? They did very well selling a whole bunch of websites and hiring a whole bunch of people to design them and code them and stuff like that. I remember our first client was Victoria's Secret. And it took literally a year and a half to convince them to put up a website because they were deathly afraid of cannibalizing their existing channels, which were catalog and stores. But ultimately, we convinced them to do it and built the very first version. And then, as a lot of clients do, they quickly take that back in-house and do it themselves. But it was a great experience. And Fast forward now 30 years, I've been doing digital marketing in various forms for that long. And a lot of it was hands-on keyboard, where I'm the one setting up the website, I'm the one publishing the WordPress blog when that first came along. I'm the one looking at Google Analytics, I'm the one running LinkedIn campaigns, YouTube campaigns. So it's really from hands-on experience that I speak. So a lot of times what I'm finding these days is that there's a lot of marketers that are very new. And in fact, some of them weren't even born when I first started, doing digital
Don't
marketing.
remind us.
So anyway, we're all old timers here, but the idea is that there's still a lot of education that needs to happen, and hopefully more and more marketers are open to new ideas, new ways of thinking about it, because a lot of times the salespeople that are coming in and selling the media have an incentive to just sell them the media. They don't really have an incentive to tell them half of it or more is just not real. I don't even blame those people because I would say that they literally don't know. And even the people at the legacy fraud verification companies, they don't know how the tech works. They don't know whether the tech catches everything, right? And that's really not their expertise. They're a salesperson. They're not an engineer or a JavaScript person, so they don't understand. So the whole point is that, getting back to what you said earlier, fraud is very big. And no one really knows what it is, even if it's Wall Street Journal that publishes a number or eMarketer or any of these accounting firms. They don't actually know because they didn't measure it themselves. So everything you see out there is an approximation. And over the past 15 years studying the fraud problem, no matter how big the number, it really doesn't scare people into action because they just think it's someone else's problem. Oh, yeah, when we look at our own campaigns, like our fraud vendor tells us it's 1%. So it's not affecting our stuff. It must be someone else's problem. So, those big numbers, unfortunately, don't actually do anything. So I've kind of, in recent years, kind of resigned myself to helping those who want to be helped. And I actually think that finally we're seeing a turnaround, right? For many, many years, there's a lot of big advertisers that didn't want to hear about it, right? They just wanted to buy more reach, more frequency, reach more people. Oh yeah, our campaign, spent 10 billion ad impressions per month, or bought 10 billion ad impressions per month, and we spent this much money, right? Some of the bigger players, I won't even name names, like they go on the ANA stage, their badge of honor is how much money they spent. Okay, shouldn't it be how much money you made from your digital marketing, not your ad
Yeah,
budget?
how many outcomes
Yeah.
did you actually deliver as a
Yeah,
result of
so I
that
Yeah.
think,
spend?
that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to get into today. But I mean, that's what I've witnessed in terms of the fraud in the last 15 years and the evolution of digital marketing over the last 30.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that kind of fear of finding out, FOFO, right? I think there's a lot of that.
Yeah,
Marketers just don't want to know. I mean, I definitely see that. And then looking at the fraud itself, you mentioned a 1% study by the ANA, and I remember you just eviscerating them online. It was actually kind of fun to watch. I did
yeah,
throw in some
I've
comments
kind of
there
made up
too.
with the ANA recently, but I mean, I pointed it out to them that they're citing numbers from the legacy vendors, and the 1% is not all the fraud there is. The 1% is all the fraud they could catch. So that's a
Yeah.
big difference, right?
Did
And so,
didn't they in 2023 put out a report? It was that sort of ad fraud, sort of wasted
I think that
inventory
was the
report.
one percent one, right? In
Well, I read
2023.
that it was they were saying ad fraud and sort of wasted inefficient media is equal to about 100 million.
well, they,
It,
that was kind of
or
when I made up.
was it 100 billion? Yeah,
It
that
was
was
like 100 billion, but
yeah.
what they were talking about is the MFA sites, right? So that's yet
Ah,
another ad tech acronym. It stands for Made for Advertising Sites, but it's
yeah.
kind of a not good acronym because all sites are made for advertising, right? That's their primary revenue model. What I see that as it kind of just another ad tech acronym that kind of covers over the problem without talking about it directly. Okay, call it fraud. Okay, don't call it MFA or IVT or NHT or any of these other three-letter acronyms, right? IVT is invalid traffic, NHT
Yep.
is non-human traffic. MFA is just the latest version called made for advertising sites. Now, there are some sites that are completely fake, right? Over the past 15 years of studying the problem of fraud, back when WordPress templates made it easy for people to create websites, the bad guys were creating 10,000 WordPress sites per day, okay, just using WordPress templates. and using 100% plagiarized content, right? They just
Well, I
had
bet with AI,
bots.
that's gonna
Yeah,
infinitely worse,
they
right?
don't need to plagiarize it anymore. They're just going to use AI to generate it, right? So, but this has been a problem that's happened for 15 years, right? And only now in 2023, the ANA said, "Oh yeah, we think the problem is a little bit bigger than the 1%,
Yeah,
and it's called."
it's more like 25%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
And it's even that's severely underestimated, right?
yeah.
So
Well,
the article I put up yesterday was basically talking about the veil of verification, right? So the verification company that advertisers have relied on for the past 15 years basically have said fraud is 1% for most of that time period. And that essentially covered up the fraud, right? If a bad guy were making 10,000 fake WordPress sites per day and putting them into the ad exchanges, and they were all marked as 1% fraud, the advertisers would not know that there's a problem. So that's been the problem, right? And it's further amplified because the trade groups like the ANA, kept putting out press releases for the last 8 years saying the problem was 1%. So in
Yeah.
well, how
essence,
much is it? I mean, I've done media audits for clients from time to time, and I've never found, frankly, like in terms of like non-human traffic, invalid traffic, never found, and not even talking about just missed optimization opportunities and just budget pissed away on random things. I mean, it's rare I found less than 20-25% on these. Like, how much is there?
Um, it depends on the context. Okay, so when I first looked at campaigns for the largest of advertisers, it's 99%. Okay. The reason it's that bad is because the biggest of advertisers have too much budget they need to spend. So then they assign or task their agency, their media agency, to go buy too much inventory that doesn't actually exist. So that creates the incentive for the bad guys and everyone in between to just manufacture as much ad inventory as needed to absorb all that budget. Okay. If we take a step back and go back to the beginning of digital advertising, the ads are supposed to load when someone actually visits a website and loads a web page, right? When the page loads, the ads are supposed to load. So that's the inventory doesn't exist before that, right? It is created when a person visits a website. That's the way it's supposed to work. Okay, but now we have it completely backwards. The biggest advertiser, I won't name names, they say, "Oh yeah, we got $2 billion we have to spend in 1 year in
It's
digital.
use it or lose it, right?
Yeah, use it or lose it.
Yep.
So go buy me, go help me spend it all, right?" So then it's like, okay, well, they go to one exchange, how much inventory can you sell me? Okay, it's this much. They go to another exchange, how much inventory can you sell me? They go to every exchange and they run out of stuff to buy. So who else can give me more inventory? Oh, there's this exchange I've never heard of before over here. They have all magically another, 10 billion impressions for me to buy.
Totally
Let's go
legit,
buy it.
right?
Yeah. And on top of that, the agencies have to spend it all so they can earn their cut of it, right? So they're also incentivized to spend it all. So long story short is the amount of impressions that are being bought and sold are completely out of whack with reality, right? And has been for the past 15 years. And
Yep.
the departure point, the point in time where we went wrong is the advent of programmatic advertising, right? So when programmatic became the dominant form of media buying, this was like 2013, 2015 timeframe, so about 10 to 15 years ago, that's when the fraud exploded. And that's because we lost sight of who the heck we were buying the ads from. Prior
Yep.
to programmatic, right, prior to this whole bidding mechanism, we had to sit across the table from ESPN and negotiate a deal. I would need to buy ads from you, or I would buy ads from Condé Nast, from Hearst, from Meredith, from legitimate publishers. You could see the people that work there.
Yep.
Once we started
Direct buys.
allocating,
Yep.
yeah, tens of millions of dollars to an exchange and said, okay, well, we don't know ahead of time where the heck these are going. We just need you to spend the $10 million for us, right? That's when everything went wrong. And so if you remember, AppNexus was one of the first exchanges. They would take the money and they would supposedly bid it out to all these different places, and then the ads would get displayed. In 2016, there was an ad exchanger article that was published to show a chart that says, okay, AppNexus purged their own exchange. They had 260 billion impressions per month. They purged 92% of it down to 20 billion per month. right? So fraud has been a 92% problem. It's a greater than 90% problem since at least 2015. But again, no one else has done that after they did that. Everything else is manufactured, right? And AppNexus didn't do it again, but that was a data point that we had back in 2015 to say that ad fraud was already a 90+% problem back then. It's only gotten worse from there.
It's interesting you say about the incentives, right? I mean, because you
Yeah,
mentioned the agencies taking their commission on it, but then you look at the entire tech tax, DSPs, SSPs, ad verification, they're all taking a cut of it that's based on the overall spend. It's not necessarily based on
correct.
an outcome or anything like that. So I mean, you could even argue that it's the incentive, there's a perverse disincentive to spend less, an incentive to spend more.
Correct.
And even if there's ad fraud, everyone's still winning. And maybe the brand's not, but then if the brand doesn't care, I mean, like, who's really accountable? I guess that's like
Yeah,
who
and
should
so
be
I kind
accountable.
it kind of gets down to the way I summarize it is that ad fraud is an incentives problem. It's not a tech problem. And for
Yep.
years we had thrown more tech at it, right? So there's all these fraud verification companies, whether it's the two big ones or others, that have sprung up to help police the problem, right? My tech included. But it's an incentives problem because a lot of people, like you said, don't want it solved. So even if the exchange or the DSP is not the one making the bots, they're certainly looking the other way because the more volume that flows through their pipes, the more money they make. So if the fraud verification companies were saying, oh, yeah, everything's 1% fraud, don't worry about it, they're going to be so happy, right? They love those numbers because then they can continue trading, they can continue making money off of what
It's a
essentially
toll.
is made up stuff.
Yeah, it's a toll. It's like
Yeah,
managing a superhighway, right?
yeah,
Yeah, and it's interesting that some of the reports that have to come out to surface some of these problems, like the analytics reports, right now at the Seattle International Film Festival, and I know you know about this, Dr. Fu, is there's a new
yeah,
movie called Unclickable,
yep,
an ad fraud operation by excuse me if I mispronounce the name, Bobis Makritis and Guy Creef.
yeah,
And in order to really show how easy it is to exploit, how
yeah,
easy ad fraud it is to exploit, these two execs gathered a team of software developers and created a digital ad fraud operation
yep,
right before our eyes, in making clickbait websites, harvesting bots
yeah,
that wouldn't get flagged as bots, just to show how extensive the problem was. So they
yep,
basically recreated the problem. And there
yeah,
was something in the trailer that I watched before the episode here, where that really kind of knocked me off my seat. Was, if you're asking how big ad fraud is, it's like asking how big the illegal drug market is in the
yeah,
United States,
yeah.
right? It's almost so large that it's hard to put a finger on.
And it's hard to believe, right? The number is so large that most people's default reaction would be to not believe it, okay? Because that would wreck their worldview, right? That would
Yeah,
wreck
that
the
can't be
entire
true.
premise.
That can't possibly be
Yeah,
true,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So, that's a great example, right? Unclickable is the name of the documentary. It's been years and years in the making, right? It's finally come to this, the film festival and all that, and it's great. And another reporter, Megan Graham, who used to write for CNBC, ran her own experiment. This was in 2020 because she found that all of her articles were being plagiarized and used on fake websites to make
Yep.
money off of her articles. So she was pissed and she said, okay, well, I want to find out how easy it is for bad guys to basically set up a fake website and make money. So she did exactly that. She registered a domain, plagiarized 10 of her own articles just to have some pages, content on the pages, and then applied to 8 exchanges to see who would let her in. 7 of the 8 exchanges let her in, and she started making money the next week, the following week, literally. And there was one exchange that didn't let her in, and can you guess which one that was?
The Trade Desk.
No, it's Google, right? So
Oh, it was
what
Google.
Google did was basically they said, well, all of this is duplicate content. Because Google obviously has a search crawler, so they crawled
Yeah.
it and said, okay, these are all exact identical articles to, what we see on CNBC.com. So they didn't let her in, but 7 of the 8 let her in, and she started making money, and she showed ads from the biggest advertisers running on her completely fake site that anyone could have seen if they literally checked when that domain was registered. Right? You could say, okay, there's no possibility that this site or this domain that's 10 days old would be, running ads. So anyway, so that's just yet another example that corroborates the documentary that you just mentioned, Unclickable. And, like I said earlier, the bad guys are setting up tens of thousands of fake sites just using WordPress templates, just populating it with whatever content
Yeah.
they have. Doesn't actually matter. And so they had a constant stream of these domains they could rotate through to just multiply their own revenue, right? So the whole Unclickable documentary said, okay, they just ran 5 websites. Okay, what if they made 500? What if they made 5,000? They could
So
literally
just scale it.
scale their own revenue at will. It was
Yeah.
that easy, right?
Yeah, and it just beyond the problem of dollars flowing away from legitimate news sites. I mean, that's a threat to more than just the advertising
Yeah.
industry.
It
That's a
impacts
threat
publishing.
to
Yeah.
to publishing in general and our ability to information versus disinformation,
Yeah,
right? Because these
let me add some stats on that. So Pointer is a nonprofit that tracks local news. So Pointer, I think a few years ago, published a study that said 1,500 local newspapers have died and gone away. Okay, so there's entire communities that no longer have a local newspaper because they were ad supported, right? When they transitioned from paper to their websites, they relied on ad revenue to make money. But those are small because of their nature, right? They're just local, to a particular town or city. They just couldn't make enough money to survive, so they've gone away. So like into that vacuum now, right? So there's a vacuum of local news. Into that vacuum, we now have entirely fake sites that have entirely fake content that's mostly fake news or deliberate disinformation making money on ads. And for them, because they don't actually have journalists or writers or people writing the content, even if it's a 5 cent CPM, 10 cent CPM, $1 CPM, it's still
Their costs
profitable.
are so low, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
yeah,
the
it's
fake site, 'cause
gravy.
it's all
Yeah,
plagiarized, right? So now the fake sites and disinformation sites have a new source of funding that they never had before. And so therefore they could expand their disinformation operations. Once that was proven, now we see an influx of foreign actors, right? Nation states, countries intent on sowing disinformation, getting in on the game because there's so much money. There's billions of dollars to be made and
yep,
expand their operations. So that now spirals into what we're seeing now, which is a society that's at most at odds with each other, right? The most divisive ever. We see so many people just not having access to real news or even fair and balanced news, right? It gets more and more polarized to a point where they're kind of incentivized to action, right? So now we actually see some of this harm spill over into like real world harm to society, right?
yeah.
And that's actually the outcome of the bad stuff that's happened over the last 15 years.
Dr. Fu, how much is being driven by the, let's say nation states and like criminal cartels versus just, random fraudsters? And how much of this is organized crime?
I think a larger percentage, obviously I don't have real numbers on that, but it's so lucrative because there's so many dollars, right? The pot is refilled every single year by the biggest of advertisers. And I think the IAB report for 2024 that just came out was like 250 something billion spent in just the US on digital advertising, but most of which is going through digital and programmatic channels. So every year, there's like $260 billion pot of gold just sitting right there by the highway, right? And there's not even a cover on that. You can just go take the
Well, you
gold.
think about it, and a lot of people are making a cut out of it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
not necessarily bad actors, but all of these, the exchanges
correct.
are certainly the
So like
DSPs, the
Google being the
SSPs are.
largest, they're making a ton of money on this. So I think that they intend to do the right thing, but they're not going to proactively do the right thing, which means, there's so many of these apps that you see in the Google Play Store. Some of it, if you just literally look, the developer address is some letters and numbers at gmail.com. Okay, that's clearly something wrong with that. And then if you look up the mailing address, it's literally a mailbox somewhere or a Taco Bell restaurant, address or something. So like some of these are so obvious that if you just look, you would know, and they're
Yeah,
all ad supported.
and
But
the Wall Street Journal's covering this now too, right? I mean, they just published an article, right? The Meta battles the epidemic of scams as
yeah,
criminals flood
yeah,
Instagram and Facebook, which was really interesting because it speaks to almost exactly what you just said. There was this wholesale company, half off wholesale, that doesn't sell direct to customers, so they don't sell online. People were impersonating them, and they found that it was largely the research was done in Australia, and I think New Zealand mostly, and people were impersonating them. There were 4,400 ads over like a year period for this particular wholesaler, selling direct to consumers, promising things like pallets of,
Yeah.
Amazon return tools, like tools that were bought on
Yeah.
Amazon that were returned, right? And yet, not 15, I think, of the total 4,400 were actually, wholesale ads
Yeah.
by the brand itself, right? So everything was just this fraudulent activity to get people to send money in for this unbelievable deal, to get merchandise,
Yeah.
and then they would never receive it, and the return address was this half off wholesale,
Yeah.
right?
So let me differentiate the scam that you just talked about versus the ad fraud stuff because it's a little bit different, right? The
Okay.
scam that you just talked about targets real humans, real people, and there's a variation on
That's
that.
just regular fraud, right?
Yeah.
That's just, yeah, that's literally just regular fraud because what I've seen happen over the years is that on Instagram as well, you see all these websites that promote 90% off your tennis shoes or other or just clothing, whatever. And when you click on it and you buy something at 90% off, you're saying, "Oh, yay, we got a great deal." But the product never arrives, and you've just given them your real credit card number and your real home address. So
Yeah.
those were what I call credit card harvesting operations, where they never had an intention to actually mail you anything, right? They were just tricking people and kind of using their kind of greed instinct to say, oh yeah, I'm going to get 90% off. Let me try to buy this. So anyway, those are scams that affect real people.
Yeah.
Ad fraud doesn't involve real people, right? It's basically websites that have no human visitors, so they basically have to buy all their traffic, and therefore 100% of the traffic is bot traffic, even if the legacy fraud detection companies couldn't detect any of it as bots.
It was interesting, Dr. Fuz. I actually was doing CPA buys for a client. I was tweeting about this morning,
Yeah,
and the client wanted CPA, and we did some incentive deals with a bunch of these networks,
yeah,
and like there was credit card fraud. People were stealing credit cards, placing fake orders,
yeah,
taking their money, and then the affiliate would do this, pump through 1,000 orders and just close right away, and
yeah,
another one would appear. So sometimes I think the two can actually mingle together, which is
yeah,
even
exactly.
Yeah.
more messed up. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, it's fraud is an overarching concept that
yeah.
has real world implications, and then to your point, just
Yeah,
these
some of
property
it's literally
sites.
just bots and whatever. And I was just one of my tweets from today talked about how you don't actually need to run websites anymore. You don't need to run ads anymore because just by faking the bid request, you can already be successful and make money. Okay, so let me reiterate. 15 years ago, bad guys had to set up WordPress sites and then put ad units on it and then buy bot traffic to load the pages, right? That's how they generated inventory to sell. Then they became more clever. They said, why waste the bandwidth on loading web pages, for the bots, right, to load web pages? Why not just do naked ad calls, which means just load the ad impression because we can just save the bandwidth without loading the page. Now, especially in CTV, we're seeing tens of billions of fake CTV bid requests per day, just manufactured, right? Use a Python script, any kind of code on the server can assemble a fake bid request, send that into the endpoints. There's not enough checks and balances. A lot of the fraud detection would just miss that that's completely fake and let it through. So then they can already make money. There's no ad that ever ran on a CTV. The apps
Yeah,
don't
that's
ever
an interesting
exist.
point. So the ad never actually shows; they're
Correct.
just making the call, getting the cash register to go ching,
Yes.
right, and then making money off of that.
Yes.
That's
Well,
really
wasn't
interesting.
CTV supposed to be like a cleaner quote? I'm using quotes here, cleaner channel,
It
right?
is.
Where
It
I mean,
is.
that was one of the pitches, right?
Let me,
Is it or is
yeah,
it not?
here's a conundrum. So let me give you two statements. There's no fraud in CTV because it's impossible. Okay, that's one statement, and that's true. And the other statement is there's 100% fraud in CTV. That's also a true statement. How can both
Is
of
it a
those
problem with
statements?
the type of CTV inventory? Because in-stream versus
Yeah,
outstream.
you
I mean,
got it.
yeah, I've
You're
seen a
just
lot
too
of
smart.
mislabeling,
Yeah,
right?
Rio, you're too smart. So there's no fraud in CTV because it's impossible. That applies to when you're buying from a Home and Garden TV, a History Channel, an A&E, a Disney, whatever. Okay, that actually sells
And
the
Amazon
inventory to you.
Prime, something like that, right? Yeah.
Because Disney or Amazon Prime, they're not actually trying to rip you off. Okay, so when you buy inventory from them, you can actually see your ad show up on a real TV somewhere in someone's living room. Okay, those are real, and there's fraud in CTV is impossible. Okay, But when you're buying CTV through programmatic exchanges, right, whatever DSP you happen to be using, then that creates the possibility of the bad guys basically manufacturing bid requests that pretend to be ESPN, that pretend to be Roku, that pretend to be anything they want. And no one has the ability to check that because we can't run JavaScript. We can't even verify that the ad ran anywhere, right? So this really boils down to this is like the most extreme case of incentives. If the advertiser doesn't care and they just want to buy a whole bunch of low cost CTV, that's the stuff they'll buy, right? It doesn't actually exist. The ad never ran. And then if on the flip side you look at ESPN, you'll notice periodically there'll be the red logo on a black background and elevator music. That's an unsold ad slot. Okay, so the mainstream CTV sellers have unsold inventory. They didn't sell out the stuff that they have. Whereas the big advertisers are buying tens of billions of CTV impressions from somewhere else. It's
Yeah,
not real.
yeah, and we've estimated at Media Radar to be 35 billion across the AVOD channels, which are like streaming catalog content,
Yeah,
live streaming, AVOD like Tubi or Pluto, MVPDs.
yeah,
That's a big market. And
yeah.
you're saying that there's a danger that it falls into a similar trap that programmatic advertising fell
Yeah,
into.
so a lot of it's basically crummy outstream, bogus. It doesn't even get served up, right? I mean, if there's, I'm assuming there's no device ID. Obviously, there's no cookies in CTV, so
There's an IP.
it shouldn't be that hard to figure this out, right?
Yeah, it shouldn't be. In fact, two teams just notified me within the last 2 weeks saying that interns found the problem. They could see a particular device ID or a particular IP address generate tens of thousands of bid requests, CTV bid requests
Yep.
per hour. Okay, that doesn't even make common sense, right? When you stream it,
That should just be blocked immediately, right? I mean,
exactly.
why would
It
you
is
even accept
so
that?
obvious that you could just block it yourself if you wanted to, right? You don't need any fraud detection company. You don't need my tech. Just look at the damn numbers and look at the bid requests coming in, and you'll be
You
able
don't
to
even need
tell.
AI. You could just have an intern looking every day
Yes.
at all the logs, right? And you
Yeah.
say, "Wow, this one." This,
Right. It is
literally,
so
that,
obvious and so
you could argue
large.
that's just criminal malfeasance, right? The fact that no one cares, they're just
Correct.
letting it
Correct.
rip.
And
Yeah.
you don't need a data analytics or data scientist to
No.
figure this out, right?
I mean, literally in an Excel spreadsheet, you can say, okay, well, this device is generating 10,000 bid requests per minute. Okay, and that's not even possible for a real device.
Yeah. Well, and it has a ton of downward pressure on performance results. So when your data science or data analytics team reports up to your CFO or your agency reports to a brand, I mean, how do they explain all of this traffic that's
Well,
not
Brett,
performing?
I think it's the opposite. I think they're saying, "Look, we spent all the money. We got all these great impressions. Like, put me on stage you can."
So
It's the
they're just
opposite.
they're just putting reach metrics out there. They're not talking about
Yeah.
outcomes and
So
engagement and
yeah, part of the problem is that they've been using, reach, clicks, traffic to the website and all that. All of those are just fungible metrics that bots can easily fake. But Brett, you bring up another important point here, and I think it's important for us to cover it on this podcast. It's the problem of attribution. Okay. So there are some advertisers that do programmatic, and the ROAS that they're seeing in the reports that they're given are so awesome. They're saying, wow, I need to take all my money from every other channel and put it into digital because the ROAS here is 10 times better than any other form of advertising. You
yeah.
might be able to guess where I'm going with this, which is the reporting, the attribution reporting, is basically taking credit for sales that had already occurred. Okay, the digital ads did not cause those sales. It's simply a figment of the way the attribution is done. So a very easy way to understand this is the concept of view-through conversions. Right. So many years ago on Google's platform DoubleClick, they said, "Oh, it's so unfair that search gets all the credit for the sale."
Yeah, the last click attribution problem.
Yeah,
Yep.
because of the last click. Display ads should get some credit because they must have helped cause the sale in some way, right?
Brand
So
awareness.
yeah,
Right.
awareness and whatever, and people may not click on it, but later they're going to come buy it. So display ads should get some credit. So then they made up this thing called view-through conversions, which said, oh, well, if a device were exposed to the ad, we will count a window of 30, 60, or 90 days. If any sales occurred in those in that window, the view-through conversion window, we're going to attribute it back to the display ad. Now, obviously, us on this call will be saying like, okay, well, you can't attribute a sale to a single display ad, because one single display ad did not cause that sale. But
Yeah.
yet that's how the whole model was built, right? So
Well, you
then
can say that if you're the one selling your display ad.
exactly,
If you
right?
get it, you will,
And
right?
Google
Yeah.
was the one selling that, so they also pushed this concept of view through conversions. So then a lot of people,
Which doesn't seem like it's any better than last click attribution.
it
Right?
isn't.
And
It's just another way of
I came
shifting.
from like I came from the MTA attribution
Yeah,
world, and there are so many exogenous
yeah,
factors, exposure factors, engagement factors
yeah.
that drive. And what we found is that more often than not, you're overcrediting a channel. You're
Yes.
overcrediting
Always
always.
overcrediting. Yeah. Because there's no exact math to that. There's no exact science to that. So you're always overcrediting. So then what's happening is that now we have this attribution model that's overcrediting display ads or other types of advertising, um, the sales to those forms of ads. Now on top of that, once you have this model that the bad guys get involved, right? So what they're now doing, and here's an example. Let me use this story. In 2016 or so, there were companies that were called location-based companies, right? Platforms. They would say, "Oh, you don't have to pay for the ad impression. You don't even have to pay for the click. You'll only have to pay us when we get someone to walk into a Dunkin' Donuts for you." Right?
With that dirty GPS data, right? There was a lot of mobile GPS data players in the ad tech
Yeah,
space,
yeah.
right?
I'm not going to name names, but it's those location-based attribution
Yep.
companies, right? So, long story short is there were too few of the people who actually saw the ad and then walked into a Dunkin' Donuts. So what they ended up doing was cheating. Okay. So the form of fraud that has to do with attribution is where they would literally buy 1 cent CPM ads and cause all 380 million devices in the US, literally every single mobile device, to be marked as exposed. So when any one of
Wow.
those mobile phones walks into a Dunkin' Donuts, they can say, "Oh yeah, we can claim credit for that because they were exposed." Okay,
Yeah, that's a cookie stuffing in the
that's
programmatic space.
essentially cookie stuffing, which is parallel to affiliate fraud and whatever, whatever. But now, if 380 million devices had a cookie stuffed, right, meaning it was marked as exposed, then anyone, including the person that walks into Dunkin' Donuts every morning anyway, would get attributed to that location-based company.
Yeah,
So that's how
terrific campaign
yeah,
performance. Like,
awesome, right? We got
off the.
so many people who walk into Taco Bell, Dunkin' Donuts,
Even
whatever.
though not a single new person, no incremental lift at all. The
Correct,
same people who have gone in anyway. Just people
correct.
have anyone with a cell
Yeah,
phone. That's
which is
wild.
Yeah,
the exogenous factors of like
yes.
I already have high propensity to buy Dunkin' Donuts, right?
Yes,
That's the explaining
exactly,
factor,
exactly.
right?
So for
Well,
years and years,
that is a tax or a toll, right? Because you're just basically we're inserting yourselves as a toll to any
yeah,
foot traffic. That's
yeah,
wild.
right. So you didn't have to pay for that, but yet the reporting said your campaigns were looking so awesome. Let's go stick more money into this because the ROAS was so awesome, right?
Well, this is a big criticism of retail media, right? Is a lot of people would have bought
Yeah,
anyway, right? And we're just,
yeah. I mean,
should you actually be doing this?
we're going to bring this full circle and basically say that the marketers are too young to actually understand anything that we just said. So basically, they'll just take the report that Google gives them or whatever platform they're buying from gives them and say, look, your ROAS is, 100x or 500x. Okay, cool. Bigger numbers are better because I'm a video game player. And so higher scores means I'm doing better. That's all they understand. Okay,
Yep.
so I'm gonna get a lot of hate mail after this, but that's really the
I think you
problem.
probably always do, Dr. Fu.
I do
So,
always, all the time. Death
Well,
threats and everything. Yeah.
and Rio, that's a great point. I won't say what our CEO says about retail media, but that's a great point about retail media because I mean the on-premise, on-site experience is
They're already in the store.
yeah, well, that's what retailers do offline as well as online.
Yeah.
But once you start going off-site and you're targeting people via the exchanges across the open web, it's the same buy you could do with the trade desk
Yeah.
or DV360 or otherwise, right? So you're saying, well, what are you really offering other than the claims of point of sale attribution when somebody goes back and buys something in your store, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and if more advertisers started to ask about incrementality, the entire house of cards of ad tech and digital advertising will fall apart, right? Because there's just
it's funny.
not
That was like a
enough.
big word in the last year, early this year. I even did a podcast on incrementality. Everyone was talking about it, and everyone rolled out these incrementality
oh yeah,
reports, right? You
yeah,
could push
oh
a
yeah.
button, boom, right? I mean, I don't know. Then it kind of disappeared. But I guess like
Well,
it's interesting as we talk about this. Like,
Yeah,
it seems like a lot of people benefit, right? Certainly, it makes marketers look good. Agencies like it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they like the fraud, but there's no reason not to like it, right? As long as it's not caught, right? All the platforms make money off
Yeah.
it, so it's not just everyone is like participating in this. They're not, but a lot of people seem like they're not, if not benefiting. They're saying, well, we're identifying IVT and non-human traffic, and our clients aren't paying for it. I mean, they're certainly paying whoever they bought the media from. It really depends on, is there a clawback in the contract? I mean, so I think a lot of people don't realize the agencies are buying media on behalf of the brands, and
at volume, at scale.
Even if you find fraud, it's hard to recoup it. I've gone through this with clients where you approach the agency and say, we found out 20% fraud. Is there a clawback? Do you get a make good? I don't. It's not.
They don't want to give it back, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the chief investment officers of the big agencies will go and buy. I know one that will buy $19 billion worth of ad inventory. Large
principal buying,
right, and because you get this volume-based discount, and then they can add margin based on what they're selling it at a CPM rate, right? And so it helps them keep the margin in a business that's very tight on margins.
Yeah.
But to your point, you're disincentivized to sort of eliminate half of that as invalid traffic.
Well, Brett, when you mentioned principal buys, I mean, I just think that it's almost like, if you're the principal, I mean, like, how can you be an agency representing a brand? I mean, I get it. Like, that's the whole, like, part of the pitch of agencies are buying in such volume. We get good deals. And it's true. If you want to buy, let's say, a ton of traditional media globally, you probably should work with a big holdco, right? Because they have the relationships. They know how to, they're the only ones who can actually execute it. But principal media buying just strikes me as being just fundamentally like a flawed model. I don't know, Dr. Fou, what you think.
The way I think about it is the principal media stuff, where the big agencies said, okay, we have so many big clients, we're pooling our buying power to get a better deal from NBC, from television networks. That worked years ago for television. But in digital, in programmatic specifically, when you're bidding, when the theory is that you're going to bid for every single ad impression, you don't need that. In theory, you're supposed to get the best price per impression. Okay, there's no need for
it's an auction, right?
Yeah, it's an auction.
Exactly.
Okay, so by doing principal buying for programmatic media, they've kind of defeated the entire premise or the purpose of programmatic media. So now, what I've seen is just vast abuses where the holdcos, like you said, Brett, they're buying billions of dollars, and then they're basically selling it to their own customers for an undisclosed markup. And those markups could be like 90% of the CPM, right?
Let's get into markups. I think that's an interesting one. So I've run media audits a couple times, and then I found it very difficult, surprisingly, to actually find what the markups were. Now you look at the contract is saying we're going to take 15%, right, or something around that, right? But then you find out, and I remember one time we were performing an audit. This agency, they wouldn't send us the markups. They wouldn't give us access to the DSP. Finally, it was wild. Someone accidentally sent us a spreadsheet one day that had all these columns hidden. We unhid them and all the markups there, and they were not 50%. Some of them had 400% markups on certain buys. And then we asked them, what is this? This is crazy. Why are you charging a client 4 times what you actually paid Google? It's it's targeting. I mean, it's bullshit, right? Because the media didn't take any additional work to do that. I don't know what you
So the very basic thing that I tell my clients to ask their media agency is, show us the CPM that you ultimately paid for the media you just bought us. Okay. They will find every excuse under the sun to not show you that.
Yep.
Because they're hiding the 400% markup.
Is that why they should maybe go pay per direct with the platforms? Is that solid?
Yes. So there's no advantage for a big company to have their media agency buy programmatic media, because programmatic media is supposed to be an auction on a per impression basis. So for the media buying, do it your damn self, right? Get a DSP where you can buy it yourself so you can see what CPM you actually paid, and then pay your media agency for doing the creative and whatever else you don't want to do for you. Don't pay them to buy your media for you, because they're going to be hiding margin in there, and you're going to be paying way, way more than what you're getting. So if, for example, you're paying a $15 CPM for display ads, you'd be lucky if the agency were paying $1 for those ads, CPM for those ads.
Yeah, which is like the price of remnant inventory,
Yeah.
basically.
Because they need to keep the margin, right? So all of that is hidden. You won't see any of that. They won't tell you what CPM they paid. And in some cases, they don't even know what CPM they paid, right? So I don't hold the individuals who work at the media agencies responsible. I hold the holdcos responsible because that's their business model to do that. So for advertisers, and I have some good ones who've kind of taken parts of this in-house, like the buying part itself, just take that part in-house. Use a DSP that you can control yourself, right? If DV360 is too big and the minimums are too large, use something else, right? There's other DSPs that you can use now for yourself. And that way you actually get to see what you pay. So if you're paying $15 and you don't actually know what's being paid out on your behalf, if you take over the DSP and you buy it yourself and you still want to pay $15, then most of that's going to actually go to the publisher for working media, right? For showing your ads. But for the most part, you could probably get it for way cheaper than the $15 yourself.
It's interesting. I mean, those are all really good points. And, I've helped a bunch of clients build in-house teams, and I think it's rare that big brands will actually buy the media themselves. But I think just having the platform licenses themselves,
Yes, to
having
look
access
at it.
themselves,
Yes,
being able to log in and not fight with an agency
yes,
about understanding what the markets are, I
correct,
think that's huge. But it's interesting though. I remember every time we've gone through this, the contracting is very, very difficult.
correct.
Explaining to, let's say, the brand, you're going to have to pay Google and Meta net 30. That's non-negotiable. They will shut you off. It's not going to be net 90, right? I mean, I think explaining to them sequential liability, there are a lot of things that go into these that takes a lot of learning, but there's a huge benefit, right?
Yeah. And I think, I've seen that happen with other things. So I've seen over time the brands have brought their verification in-house because, years ago there would be a case where they'll say like, show us the verification vendor's data. And the agency will say no because they hold the contract and the advertiser has no rights to see the data. Right. So then I saw a few cases where the advertiser brought the verification vendor contract in-house so they could actually log into the dashboard and run reports themselves. So that was a step further, that was a better step than what they were doing before. So I'm hoping that some of that will happen on the buying itself. Now, there are companies that I work with, like Goodway Group, where they will kind of provide that transition plan. So if the advertiser is not ready to bring it all in-house because they simply haven't hired the right people yet, big company like Goodway Group can actually help them kind of make a plan, a transition plan, where they would do the managed service for them, buy it for them, and then use that process to educate. And also while the advertiser hires a person or two to actually do that in-house. So I think that's a rational way of doing that. And like, okay, let's use programmatic the way it was meant to be used. It's an auction system. You're supposed to get the best price for every single ad impression you buy. But all of that has not happened in the last 15 years because of all of the misaligned incentives at every step of the stack. So I think it's time to get better. And once the advertisers actually buy their own stuff, they'll actually be buying better stuff. They're not going to be buying the remnant crap because they don't know that they're buying the remnant crap right now.
I think it's a solution. Do you think we need regulations? I mean, I mean, I guess everyone's been saying industry should regulate itself, but you could probably
No, it's
argue
like,
it doesn't work so well. But I'm
we
not a big believer in regulations. I'm
yeah,
just
it
curious.
doesn't work. I mean, because you can have all the regulations you want. It adds burden on the good guys, and the bad guys don't follow it anyway. Literally doesn't help, doesn't deter the bad guys. Okay, yeah, and
So
we have
Well,
innovation.
you need enforcement with your regulation, and
yeah,
can
yeah.
you trust the industry to regulate itself? Through
No,
the
and
IAB
here's
and
the problem with enforcement in digital advertising, right? So, the people who are supposed to enforce, so whether it's the MRC, the trade bodies, whatever, they don't have the actual tech tools to go do the audits, right? You guys have
yep,
done audits. I've done audits. They don't have those tools. So when you say give us your log level data or give us the, reports, it's going to be whatever the platforms tell you, right? It's going to be 1% fraud because that's what they told you, right? So
yep,
they're not going to be able to figure out unless they really probe and all that kind of stuff. So at best, you're going to get something like the ISBA reports from years ago, where it's like 50% of your spend went to somewhere else because we couldn't account for it, right? Only 50% went through the publisher. You're going to get a generality like that you can't act on. Okay. So regulations, laws, whatever, that's not really going to cut it. It's going to take years and years. Advertisers need to care about their own dollars.
yep.
If they don't care, no one else is going to care for them, right? So I'm seeing a turnaround, but it's a slow turnaround, right? It's literally one or two or literally single advertiser will say, okay, fuck that. We got to look at what we're buying, right? We can't just trust the reports that we're given. Okay. Once that happens, a lot of good stuff happens. But
It'll
that's
change
So it has to
behavior.
start with the
Yeah.
brands. It has to
it
really go
has to
back there. They
start
have
with the
to say,
brand.
like, we're not putting up with this. Like,
Yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
going to pay for 25 or 50 or whatever percent fraudulent traffic or whatever. Like,
Yeah. And,
okay.
it really, we can't solve it for the industry, but we can solve it one brand at a time, and we will help those brands who actually want to be helped.
Yeah. And then there's a domino effect, you hope, right? Because they realize the benefits from their brand
Yeah,
competitors
I
from
mean, their peers are
incumbents.
going to tell them, look, we just brought this in-house. We just started, using better analytics rather than fraud detection. And we could see that, oh, well, they've been telling us it's been 1% for the last 8 years. Okay, when we first put better analytics in there, I'm not even going to name my platform, but it's like, okay, when we have analytics, we can see it's like 90% red. Okay, and with that, you can actually see which ones are the bad sites and bad apps that you need to take out first, right? Which are the most egregious bad guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of DSPs are starting to expose log files, right? Which amazingly, many of them didn't until recently. So I think that's good.
Exactly.
So if you bring these in house, you'll have access to that data. You'll need teams to analyze it, but I mean that's part of the in-housing work is you need to build that muscle, right?
Some
I think
of
that's
it, but
interesting.
let me help to lower the fear for the advertisers, right? When you tell them you have terabytes of log level data to process, they don't know how to do that. They don't even know who to hire to do that. Okay. I'm going to tell them it's not necessary. Okay. And the reason it's not necessary is that the log level data also contains errors. The log level data comes from recording all the bid requests. Okay, so in the bid request, there's going to be the domain, the CPM, the this, and this, okay, or viewability, user agent, whatever. Bad guys will lie on all of it. Okay, so if you have a fake site, fakesite123.com, you're never going to put your own domain in there because you're never going to get any bids. The fake sites, the fraudsters will always have to lie, and they'll put ESPN.com, MarthaStewart.com, FoodNetwork.com. They will always lie. That's what gets recorded in the log level data. So you won't see the fake sites in there. That's the problem with log level data. Now, the reason a lot of people have been talking about log level data is because of the analytics reports. They process log level data, and yes, they can see some problems, but those are tiny
Yeah.
problems. I would
The
characterize those.
CSAM reports and the
Yeah,
MFA reports.
I
Yeah.
would say that it's the script kiddies who messed up and forgot to disguise their site. Okay, that's what they're
Yeah.
catching.
And
All
that's a small percentage of the
That's a
larger problem, is what
small
you're saying.
percentage, right? Because organized crime, well-practiced criminals have,
They're not going to be that
yeah,
obvious in
they're
terms
they're
of
gonna have done this for 10 years, so they're gonna, lie better on their bid
Yeah.
request. So,
It's
uh,
interesting you talk about the 10-year going back 10 years because I think like about 10 years ago, maybe a little more. I mean, I like media agencies really split off from creative. Remember that was a big decision
yeah,
everyone made, right? I actually think that was a strategic error, right? Because I think that forced people on the media side to overlook a lot of these things, right? You have to make your money. Like, so if you're going to make
yeah,
your money, then you're going to be marking up stuff and not telling your client. You're going to be not
yeah.
caring if there's a lot of fraud because you don't, because so I actually think that some of these trends you're talking about, in-housing things, I think it'll really be good for agencies. They'll be able to focus on what they're really good at.
And they'll get
And,
paid for
and,
their
and
expertise, right?
yes,
So
Yeah.
but brands need them.
Yeah.
That's not
yeah,
going to change.
yeah. So I
Yeah,
think,
strategic
it's really going to
expertise,
be,
MMM, creative expertise, all that.
yeah.
Yep.
And the ones that are redundant, that are not actually adding any value, will die and go away. And that can't happen
Yeah.
soon enough, right? So I think it's all going to be a good thing, but we're going to go through a period of pain where all of these transitions are hard because people like to do what they're used to doing. Change is hard, right?
Yeah.
And business model change is even harder, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to have to figure out what you're actually good at and what you can actually charge for and what the clients are willing to pay you for, not just try to mark up stuff and not tell them.
Yeah. And programmatic media buying at scale is probably not one of those places that
Yeah,
you need to be playing
the
in.
whole point of programmatic media buying is to automate that. So let the algorithms do their job, right? So
Yeah.
don't hide all this stuff with all these shenanigans and tricks and basically financial fraud.
So 5 years from now, do you think this problem's solved? Do you think it's partially solved? Where do you think we end up?
We have a few more big advertisers who will actually be doing awesome work. I have one, and I also work with Goodway Group, and they're doing great across many clients. And that's because they have the right tools, they have their incentives in the right place. So they're actually looking at the data and that kind of stuff. So I'm hopeful given that, right? I've seen what it can be, right? How good it can be. So I'm hopeful that more advertisers will come around. But like you said, there's a problem of expertise or experience or hiring the right people if you need those people in-house, right? A lot of brands don't have that simply because they've outsourced most of these things for so long, they just don't have the expertise. But I think, with a lot of the layoffs that we've seen, there's real talented people who are actually available. Hire those people, right? You only need a few gems. That's all you need, right? Because then they can help you set up the campaign, look at it periodically. They don't have to look at it daily because you need the algorithms to work. Look at it
It's
once
not
a
like the
week.
agencies look daily. Don't worry about
Yeah, exactly.
it.
But like check it once a week, make small tweaks, and everything's going to get better.
Yeah, and I think too, like I agree with you. I think brands will say, "Oh, it's hard to find the talent," which I think historically was true. Not a
Yeah,
lot of people
that's
out there
true.
with the right talent,
Yeah,
or even if you hired them, they don't like to stick around. A lot of I think the most talented people. I mean, you're a working agency, you get to jump between big brands. People jump agencies a lot. It's
yeah,
kind of there's a certain lifestyle there. I think working for an in-house team is very different, right?
yeah.
But I think that's a good point. There's a lot of talent out there. That can help you get more value from what you're spending, and I think work better with your agencies too.
Yep.
So,
So Dr. Fu, if you had to mandate 3 immediate changes in the ecosystem tomorrow, what would they be? Like if we had to summarize your key recommendations, which have come out in a number of ways through this conversation, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, this is kind of unpremeditated, so it's just literally off the top of my head. One of the key things that I've been looking at recently, and I was talking with John Watts at Sim, is about CTV. Define CTV more clearly, because right now, because it's such a fungible definition, you're getting a whole bunch of low-cost crap that's being mixed in. So the CTV ads are running on bad websites and bad mobile apps. That's not CTV. If you just define CTV more strictly, as we do in my platform, Foo Analytics, if it didn't run on a big screen TV, you can't sell it as CTV. Okay, you can sell it as OLV, online video, but don't charge me CTV prices for stuff that didn't
Yep.
run on the TV.
Yep.
Just that basic change, just tightening up the definition will start to lead to better behaviors, right? If you see your vendor is actually selling you the crap that's running on websites and mobile apps for CTV prices, cut that vendor, buy from someone else
Yep.
who's not doing that, right? So that's what I mean by such a simple change will make things better. Because CTV is where everyone is piling investment in, and it's the highest CPM, so you need to be more careful with your dollars there.
Yeah, it's got to have the value that television,
Yes.
sound, sight, and motion
Yeah.
delivered on a giant screen in somebody's living room.
Yeah. There's no cheap CTV. Let me just put it that way. Okay.
rates have gone down, right? I mean, I think Netflix artificially inflated the market when they were it was $50 CPM or something like that, right? But they've crashed down to earth. But still good CPM, like in-stream inventory is still like 25, $30, right? Which is
Yeah, should be,
people,
right? If you're seeing
yeah.
$5 CTV, it's not CTV. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and advertising against streaming catalog, like a catalog of shows and content that these providers have, is very different than live streaming, for example, right? Where your CPMs are going
Yeah,
to be
I think
television quality.
I
or
think both of
television
you are
level.
still talking about buying from real media sellers, real CTV, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what I see is like, okay, these are CTV campaigns, but why are they running on these apps that nobody's ever heard of before, right? So it
Yeah.
is, so I'm seeing a whole bunch of other stuff that's not even running on the real CTV.
Yeah, on the Hulus or the
Yeah, yeah.
Netflixes or yeah.
And then
What else?
yeah, the second one would be really challenge your legacy verification vendors, right? So very basically, they've been telling you fraud is 1% for the last 8 years, right? Through their press releases and whatever. Everyone knows. It's common knowledge that fraud is not 1%. So ask them, how the heck did they get that number? Okay, now part of what will start to come out is the fact that they only measured 1 in 100 impressions. If they didn't measure the other 99. Now, obviously, this kind of sampling doesn't happen all the time, but you should actually ask, do they do sampling? What percentage of your ads were actually measured with a JavaScript tag where possible,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Because if they didn't measure it with a JavaScript tag, they're not going to catch the bots.
Yeah.
Okay.
Extrapolation's not going to work here,
Exactly.
right?
So
It's
if
not like a
99,
census level prediction of
yeah,
audience, right?
if 99 of the 100 ads were not measured, you should not assume that they were fraud free. You should assume they just didn't measure it. Okay, that's all. So I think more and more advertisers ask their legacy verification vendors where they got their numbers, they'll start to understand. Like I said before, the 1% is not all the fraud there is, the 1% is all the fraud they could catch. Okay, that's
Yeah.
a big difference. And so it gives them the opportunity to upgrade their tools so that they can see better. And when they can see better, they can do better. Okay.
Yeah, and we talked about that topic with Stephanie Laser at AWS in our first episode, and we all kind of came to the conclusion that there needs to be some competition in that space to force innovation and to force change. So, what's your third recommendation?
It'll kind of be what we talked about earlier, which is like focus on attribution and figure out the incrementality, and don't just take the attribution reports that you're given, because in most cases, it's going to be overclaiming credit for sales that had already occurred. So for advertisers that care, you want to know what actually drove incremental sales, which were the sales that would not have occurred in the absence of the advertising, right? If the sales occurred without the advertising, okay, you didn't need to pay for the advertising, right? Because those are people that would have bought from you anyway.
Yeah. So and that takes a little data science muster. And
it takes testing too, right? I mean, incrementality, you need an approach. Not like you press a button, boom, you're done.
Correct.
Right? In fact, any platform that offers that, I wouldn't necessarily trust.
Yeah, you have to do your own testing. And I think just to simplify it for advertisers listening in on this, it would be to run geo holdouts. So this goes back to
holdouts is key. Yeah,
eBay, right? So they turned off the West Coast, and the sales kept happening. Okay, they turned off search ads on the West Coast, and the sales kept happening. So then they could say, oh, well, that's because the sales were going to happen anyway. So I think it's
an unexposed audience that's fully verified.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think for advertisers, don't be afraid, because they'll say, oh, we need a vendor to do the incrementality. Okay, yes, there are vendors that can do that, but there are simpler ways that you can do yourself, like turn off a state, turn off a city, see if the sales are actually still occurring. If they are, then turn off another one, just check, right? So there are simple experiments that you can do to see if the sales actually were caused by the ads. If the sales continue, that means it wasn't caused by the ads.
Well, it takes actually thinking and work. I mean, I would argue there are some marketers out there who probably
we're being too
manage vendors, right? But if you're a true marketer, you should love this shit, right? Because that's the fun, right? You're coming up with an incrementality test, right? You run the test, you see what it like. I mean, I think that's the fun part of marketing, not just like getting stuff from your agency, your vendor every month, and showing your boss how well you're doing, right? I mean, that's.
Yeah, and it's applying the scientific method to this, right?
That's
You're saying,
right.
How do you actually prove that someone was? It's harder when you're doing a national television buy or a national radio buy, because then everybody has the likelihood of being exposed, whether it's trackable or not. When you do it digitally, that's when you can start getting.
You can start to control these things. Yeah.
Yeah, similar demographics, similar audiences, on and off. Compare and contrast. Build your algorithm to properly predict this stuff.
So we brought it full circle in exactly an hour. We're going to get hate mail from every party in the entire ecosystem after this one.
Well, Dr. Fou, this was you lived up to the hype. This was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Having this conversation, and great hearing your perspective, your hands-on experience, the research you've done. I'm sure it's I'm sure a lot of us in the ad tech ecosystem that have been following you for a while are aware of some of these things. But I think this is going to be good new information for a lot of our listeners. So this is
Thank you. Yeah, great dialogue. Thank you.